Europe is cracking. Diesel prices spiked 8% in a single week after Ukraine struck Russian oil. German factories just logged their worst losing streak since the Euro crisis. And as Brussels stayed home, China pulled in the world with an economy growing 3 times faster than Europe's. Then Slovakia's Robert Fico stood up and shouted what no EU leader dared. Have you lost your minds? He isn't just lashing out. He's exposing the arrogance, the hypocrisy, and the blind spots that could push Europe from power to irrelevance. Fico's first target was Ukraine's strikes inside Russia. According to Reuters in August 2025, attacks on oil refineries knocked out 15% of Russian processing capacity, which briefly pushed European diesel prices up 8% in a single week. For Kyiv, these operations were retaliation. For Brussels, they were proof of resilience. For Fico, they were sabotage of Europe's fragile stability. His claim was stark. Slovakia and its neighbors cannot secure their own energy while Ukraine escalates on Russian soil. Critics in Brussels counter that such strikes drain Moscow's war chest and deter further aggression. The clash highlights a deeper fault line, whether Europe's interests are best served by maximum pressure or by limiting collateral damage. He sharpened the point in a face-to-face exchange with Volodymyr Zelensky. Bloomberg reported in late August that Ukraine had doubled drone raids on Russian energy assets since June. Fico's reply was blunt. You cannot protect your own national interests by damaging others. His stance rejects the assumption that Europe's solidarity with Ukraine overrides national vulnerabilities. Neutral analysis asks whether his warning is alarmist or pragmatic. Diesel shocks ripple fast into transport, farming, heating, and if allies crack under those costs, does deterrence strengthen or fracture? The challenge extended eastward to China. While EU leaders skipped Beijing's 85th anniversary celebrations, Fico attended. He mocked the absence as self-isolation. The Financial Times reported in July that nearly 80% of Europe's rare earth imports still came from Chinese suppliers, critical for electric cars and wind turbines. By ignoring the event, Europe forfeited a chance to influence its biggest supplier. His claim reframes engagement not as betrayal, but survival. Brussels offers its own rationale. Officials argue that engaging China risks legitimizing authoritarian power and deepening dependency. The European Commission's June strategy paper called Beijing both a partner and a systemic rival, citing concerns about security risks in 5G, technology theft, and unfair subsidies. Neutral assessment sees a trap either way. Distance erodes access to raw materials, while closeness undermines political principles. Fico chose pragmatism. Critics insist he underestimates the strategic costs. The conflict is between short-term industrial needs and long-term sovereignty. On Russia, the confrontation cut deeper. Fico insisted normalization must remain possible, despite sanctions. He declared that Western companies never truly left Russia. The Wall Street Journal confirmed in July that more than 400 foreign firms still operate there, from consumer goods to engineering. And Reuters reported in May that Russia supplied 11% more liquefied natural gas to Europe year on year, despite rhetoric of energy independence. His claim, Europe's morality is theater, business its reality. Brussels counters that sanctions, though porous, signal resolve and constrain Moscow's future capacity. The test is whether symbolism justifies costs when loopholes keep trade flowing. Fico's attack expanded into scandal. He cited former EU Justice Commissioner Didier Reynders, investigated in Belgium for alleged money laundering. The Financial Times covered the case extensively in June. For Fico, the point was simple. An institution riddled with its own corruption cannot credibly lecture Beijing or Moscow. Neutral analysis must balance this. The EU's defense is that accountability through legal scrutiny proves its institutions function. Still, public trust data complicates that defense. Eurobarometer surveys in July found confidence in EU institutions below 50% in half of member states, the lowest in more than a decade. Credibility is not a given. It must be earned. The automotive industry exposed another layer. Bloomberg reported in August that China temporarily delayed export licenses for rare earths, disrupting production lines in Germany and Slovakia. Fico claimed Chinese officials privately assured him Slovakia's request would face no obstacles. His hypothesis, bilateral pragmatism, secures survival while EU pride risks shortages. Critics counter that individual deals undercut collective leverage, leaving Europe divided and weaker. The question becomes whether unity is strength if it leads to scarcity, or whether fragmentation is survival in disguise. The NATO question was most explosive. Fico said Ukraine must never join the alliance. He insisted peace requires security guarantees for both Kyiv and Moscow. For many in Brussels, this is capitulation. For him, it is arithmetic. If we keep playing with NATO expansion, the conflict will never end. The Wall Street Journal reported in August that European diplomats quietly floated mutual security guarantees as a framework for future settlement. Neutral analysis sees Fico's claim not as endorsement of Russia, but acknowledgement of limits. War rarely ends with victory parades. It ends with maps redrawn. Critics argue that denying Ukraine NATO membership emboldens Moscow, undermining deterrence across Eastern Europe. The divide is between deterrence as insurance versus compromise as closure. Let's stop, because this isn't just politics anymore. It's arithmetic. IMF data released in July 2025 showed Europe's share of global GDP slipping below 14% for the first time, while China and emerging markets expand their weight. This is not rhetoric. It is the steepest decline in Europe's relative position since 2013. The implication is brutal. Every moral lecture costs influence when backed by shrinking economic power. Fico's cry that Europe risks irrelevance is not just polemic. The numbers confirm the trajectory. The question is whether EU leaders can adapt faster than their leverage erodes. Industrial weakness reinforces the decline. Reuters reported in August that German manufacturing output fell 2.8% year-on-year, marking 6 straight quarters of contraction, the worst streak since the Euro crisis. Slovakia, tied heavily to car exports, faces similar exposure. Fico's claim that our economies are shrinking is not abstract, it is measurable. Brussels counters that diversification, digital investment, and green transition programs will reverse the slide. Yet every factory closure erodes patience. Public tolerance for sacrifice wanes when livelihoods vanish. Protest movements underscore the risk. The Financial Times documented demonstrations in Poland and Czechia in late August, sparked by high energy bills and food costs. Citizens chanted not against Moscow but against Brussels. Neutral analysis of Fico's rhetoric suggests he channels grievances rather than invents them. Critics say this weaponizes discontent for political gain, yet the pressure is real, and dismissing it as fringe underestimates how quickly it spreads. Security fragility tightens the bind. Bloomberg reported in early September that U.S. weapons shipments to Ukraine slowed amid congressional gridlock. Europe cannot cover the gap. Fico's refusal to station Slovak troops on Ukrainian soil highlights a sovereignty boundary. A neutral reading shows a paradox: EU unity depends on national decisions that diverge under strain. Critics argue that collective defense requires sacrifice, but the test is whether publics accept those sacrifices as costs of security or reject them as impositions from afar. Global alignments worsen the optics. Reuters reported in July that central banks from Turkey to India added nearly 120 tons of gold in one quarter, diversifying away from the dollar. China alone accounted for over 60 tons. These shifts signal a multipolar reality in which Europe is no longer the default pole of legitimacy. Fico's insistence on respecting Beijing resonates with states already hedging against Western dominance. Brussels insists its strength lies in values. A neutral evaluation must ask, when values clash with material leverage, which persuades global partners more? Fiscal pressure compounds the dilemma. IMF data in August warned that Italy's debt exceeded 140% of GDP, and France topped 110. Eurostat recorded a 0.4% contraction in the Eurozone economy in the second quarter, the sharpest downturn since the pandemic rebound. Fico's warning that our systems are falling apart may exaggerate, but the numbers show structural strain. Critics counter that fiscal integration and the European Central Bank's tools safeguard stability. Neutral analysis weighs both sides. The safety net is real, but so is the debt mountain. His critics insist he exaggerates. They argue that sanctions isolate Russia over time, that moral consistency deters aggression, and that Europe's green transition requires breaking from dependency at any cost. These arguments hold weight. Deterrence logic is that credibility requires consistency. Break it once and the cost multiplies. Neutral analysis acknowledges this. Yet Fico's retort is that consistency without effectiveness is theater. He tests whether principles can outlast public tolerance for decline. Foreign investors seem less tolerant already. The Wall Street Journal reported on August 22nd that foreign direct investment inflows into the Eurozone fell 18% year-on-year, the sharpest drop since 2012. Investors read signals in supply chains and energy costs, not speeches. When capital moves elsewhere, rhetoric loses traction. Fico's warning that Europe is burying its head in the sand is difficult to dismiss when flows confirm retreat. The ultimate paradox is that Fico, derided as a pariah, may be articulating vulnerabilities Brussels prefers to whisper. His bluntness strips away diplomatic varnish. Neutral examination shows he is not always right, but rarely irrelevant. Critics charge him with undermining solidarity. He counters that solidarity without survival is self-delusion. The test is not whether Europe likes his tone, but whether it can afford to ignore the substance. As Europe weighs its course, the ground shifts beneath it. Economic weight diminishes. Public trust erodes. External dependencies tighten. A prime minister's shout cuts through the noise because it embodies what others hesitate to admit. And the unsettling final question lingers. If Europe waits until its leverage has collapsed to face these realities, who will still be listening when it finally decides to speak? We're glad you're enjoying this video. Please like and subscribe. Check out another video that is now on your screen.